The Moto G line has grown to have a few different variants with each new release, with specific focuses for each iteration. So we're going to start with the cheapest of the bunch and work our way up, seeing what makes them tick along the way. This is Pocket Now, and I'm Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? This is the Moto G Play, the Moto G Power, and the Moto G Stylus. Now, before we get started, allow me to remind you that I host the Pocket Now Weekly podcast every single week, and you can catch it on whatever podcasting network or app you choose. Come out and hang out with me and a guest every episode to talk about the top topics of the week. See you there. Now, there are going to be some key similarities among all of these phones, since the basic DNA of Moto is available across the different price points. Those will be covered when I get to the top of the line of the Moto Gs, the Moto G Stylus. And along the way, I'll be giving the main points for each phone that help bring all of that Moto-ness to life. Perhaps the best way to approach these phones is to do a mini review of each. There aren't too many things to say at the outset with the entry-level Moto G, because after all, it is the most affordable of the bunch and you get what you pay for. The top-level details about this phone are the fact that it has a sizable screen and a large battery that is able to power that screen for long sessions of, let's say, watching and, well, perhaps playing. But in order to make this phone the price that it is, which is $169, Moto definitely had a lot to mitigate. A blue plastic sandwich culminates in the 6.5-inch IPS panel, including amenities complete with a headphone jack up top and a rear-mounted fingerprint reader. The Moto G Play, by the way, is the only one that doesn't integrate this fingerprint reader into the power button. Overall, the phone doesn't feel too cheap despite the price point, with the comfortable handling due to the curve on the back and a flat display. What puts the Moto G Play at the bottom of the heap actually starts with the screen though, which might have some size, but it just doesn't sport much resolution. At 720p, the panel barely gives you the bare minimum when it comes to viewing experiences. There's also quite a bit of bezel around it, with more in the chin than anywhere else. Now, the specs for this phone scale down accordingly. The Qualcomm Snapdragon 460 brings just enough power to enjoy media consumption and light gaming, with 3GB of RAM helping to multitask as long as you don't expect to be zipping in and out of too many applications. You only get 32GB of onboard storage, but at least it is expandable with a microSD card. Now, the Snapdragon 460 is not 5G enabled, which is also true for all the Moto Gs and the processors that they sport. And then one of the main stories of the Moto Gs appears. The Moto G Play and the Moto G Power both rock 5000 mAh batteries, which are meant to last for days on end. And in a nutshell, this phone definitely goes that distance, and it makes sense given the screen and the processing package. I think pretty clearly that the Moto G Play is meant for someone who just needs a long-lasting phone. You can get some enjoyment for watching media at such a low price, but naming this phone the Play is less about performance and more about consumption. It's certainly not about creation either, because the 13-megapixel main sensor backed by a 2-megapixel depth sensor provide, well, middling results. The front-facing camera at 5 megapixels is also far from a great performer. Now, the Moto Camera app on the Moto G Play also lacks in some of the marquee features that the company likes to tout, like cinemagraphs. In the end, the Moto G Play is a cheap phone, which itself can be a good thing, but the performance has to scale down accordingly, and I can only recommend this one for anyone that literally just needs a phone and pretty much nothing else. So we turn things up a little bit. The Moto G Power takes a lot of what the Play introduces to the line and then gives a few things a little bit of a boost. You get the same 5000 mAh battery here that can last for quite a long time. In fact, it's with this Moto G Power that I was able to get through 3 whole days of usage, doing things like watching YouTube and playing lighter games. Now, to be fair, given my work-from-home lifestyle these days, this was all basically done on Wi-Fi. Still, having no worries about battery life even after 1, maybe even 2 days, is something that we don't see all the time. The Moto G Power also moves the fingerprint reader to the power button, which is a nice touch. It certainly cleans up the backing a little bit more, which is still a plastic-on-plastic build. The headphone jack does stick around, and the display bumps up to 6.6 inches, but it's still a 720p IPS panel, providing again the bare minimum. I know that expectations have to be managed anyway when coming to these mid to budget range phones, but after working with so many phones at 1080p and up, both the detail and the refresh rate are super obvious to my eyes when coming down to this screen. Moto puts the Snapdragon 662 in the Moto G Power, giving it a little bit more power to play with than the Play, especially if you opt for the 4GB RAM option. This one is certainly more equipped for a little bit more work, a little bit more multitasking, and maybe a little bit more gaming. The G Power also puts a little bit more into the 5000 mAh battery, as this is the only phone of the bunch that will support 15-watt charging instead of 10 watts. The camera is also a bit better here, with a pixel binning 48 megapixel main sensor that moves the picture quality back up to decent quality overall. The 2 megapixel depth and 2 megapixel macro sensors are questionable additions, but at least the main shooter can provide some proper use. The same goes for the front-facing camera, which is now up to 8 megapixels. In the best lighting conditions, there are pictures from the Moto G Power that can be pleasing, so if you're in a pinch and this phone is the only camera available, well, it can certainly come in handy. Video, however, is definitely where I find things fall apart quite quickly, and not just the fact that it only does 1080p across all of the lenses. But what might be most interesting about this Moto G Power this year is that it actually downgraded many of its parts from the previous iteration. You see, in the previous version, the screen used to be 1080p, the processor used to be the 665, and the cameras used to be able to record 4K video. So if you've been following along, the Power might be a weird move from Moto this time around, especially since the price went up significantly, maybe because the Moto G Play officially came in and took over the super low price bracket. Maybe the decent pictures coming out of the 48 megapixel camera is enough to entice you, but the low resolution screen alone is enough of a major gripe for me for a phone that is $249. And finally enter the Moto G Stylus, the phone that takes the biggest leap in price but also scales accordingly. If the Moto G Play scaled downward, the Stylus, the Moto G Stylus, does it right in the opposite direction. It is the largest of the bunch. The plastic builds still stick around, but there's a bit more to it this time, and the backing is much glossier. The headphone jack relocates to the bottom, the fingerprint reader is again in the power button, and then of course you get that stylus nestled in the bottom corner. The screen gets even bigger at 6.8 inches. It's also a full HD panel, finally bringing better resolution for all of the things both the Play and the Power claim they can still make enjoyable, but kind of lack in the display fidelity. To be fair, it is still an IPS panel though, which gets you some extra brightness, but like the other two phones, it sacrifices in contrast and always-on display capabilities. The internals are a little bit of a mixed bag, with a bump up to the Snapdragon 678, which is just a little more power than found in the Moto G Power. 4GB of RAM is the standard, while the 128GB of storage is expandable. Sure, the battery shrinks, perhaps to accommodate room for the Stylus, but at 4000 mAh, this phone is still able to get up to 2 whole days without many issues. Again, my usage was mostly on Wi-Fi and through media consumption, but again, it's still safe to say that this phone will get you past full-on days of work and play without any problems. So among the three, the Moto G Stylus is the best expression of Moto's features and software DNA. For example, the cameras are better equipped for the different Moto creative tools. You get a 48 megapixel main sensor and a 16 megapixel front-facing shooter, both of which are capable of features like spot color and cinematograph. Cinematograph is cool, but I found it harder to get right than I initially expected. Pictures from these cameras can be achieved through pixel binning, with results that are, let's say, good enough. The wide-angle shooter that Moto adds in on the G Stylus is a little less exciting, not just because it won't record 4K video like in the main camera, but also because it's got enough distortion in the edges to be distracting. And finally, we have 4K video recording, which can be done only on the main sensor. It's not available for the wide angle that they did include in the Moto G Stylus. On the software side, all of the features Moto puts into their phones are easily found across the line in the Moto app. Display features include the peak display, which is easily one of the most useful things. A tap on the display brings up notifications in circles on the lower third, where you can tap and hold on them for previews of said notifications and then swipe up to go straight to them. Peak display also provides easy to access media controls that are fairly robust. And other features include gestures like pressing the screen with 3 fingers to trigger a screenshot, game time controls which turn off notifications during gaming sessions, and the classic moves like the twist for camera and the chop chop for the flashlight. These are all of the Moto features available across the Moto G line, but of course, it gets a little bit different once you take this stylus out. Now, the stylus is the simple way of adding precision inputs to the Moto G line. You get expected features like selective screenshotting, doodling on said screenshots, and a note-taking apparatus where you can chicken scratch reminders to yourself. The included coloring book application is a nice touch in case you need a moment for just like coloring things, obviously. It's also helpful for selecting the areas for cinemagraphs. Part of what makes the Moto G Stylus intriguing is the fact that the vast majority of phones out there don't include accessories like this. So if you're looking to get more out of your phone than just a tap tap tap, well, Moto is providing that option. This stylus, plus the better screen, the better internals, and the better cameras add up to a $299 device, which I think actually puts it squarely in a bracket full of phones that, to this phone's credit, none of those other ones come with a stylus. So maybe you can keep that in mind. probably no surprise that I will go for the Moto G Stylus from this bunch, but if you're really looking to save as much money as possible, just remember to manage your expectations as the prices get lower and lower. And so there you have it, a look at the latest releases in the Moto G line. Let me know which one of these you would pick up, whether you would go for the most premium of the three, the Moto G Stylus, or if you're really looking to save a lot of money and you might even go for the Moto G Play. Let us know in the comment sections down below, drop some likes on this video, and subscribe to Pocket Now if you haven't already for videos that are coming out pretty much every single day. With all that said, I'm going to call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching, take care of yourselves and each other, and we will see you in our next video.